Over 1.5 million soldiers killed or wounded.
Entire cities reduced to rubble.
4 years of war.
And still, nobody knows how this ends. Until now. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a deeply complex, incredibly sobering reality. We are heading into the 5th year of the largest European conflict since World War II. And based on some really deep analysis from the Kiev School of Economics, the Carnegie Endowment, and the Atlantic Council, it looks like 2026 is shaping up to be the absolute make-or-break year. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The price of 4 years.
So, to figure out where this war is actually going, we kind of have to ground ourselves in where we currently are. We've hit this crossroads where sheer battlefield courage is just colliding head-on with brutal economic limitations. Look at how this timeline has shifted over the years. Back when the initial invasion kicked off in 2022, very few people predicted we'd be looking at a grinding war of attrition by 2024. In fact, Western allies and global economists, they heavily banked on this whole thing wrapping up in 2025. Literally all the financial models, all the aid packages, they were essentially built on that exact assumption. But, well, the war didn't end. Russia's military-industrial complex just kept expanding. And now, we're staring down 2026, a deeply protracted conflict that, honestly, nobody officially budgeted for.
And to really grasp what that actually looks like on the ground, listen to this quote. This is from Vasily, a Ukrainian frontline officer. He says, "I've jumped into their trenches. They're really afraid of us. We simply have nothing to strike it with." I mean, that just perfectly captures the paradox of this war right now. The fighting spirit, the tactical courage, absolutely through the roof. But it's hitting a literal brick wall of logistics and economic reality. Because at the end of the day, you simply cannot win a war of attrition if you don't have the ammunition.
Section 2. The 2026 funding cliff. Okay, let's dive into this next part, because the reality is, the actual war right now might be lost on a spreadsheet just as easily as it could be lost on the battlefield. Fighting a full-scale invasion doesn't magically get cheaper over time. For 2026, Ukraine's defense needs have absolutely skyrocketed to an estimated $73.7 billion, and that covers the whole shebang, from troop salaries right down to essential military inventories. But look at this projected shortfall here. With international macro-financial aid programs from the West set to expire, economists are projecting a massive gap.
That shortfall? It is exactly $18 billion. Just take a second and let that number sink in. It's a mind-blowing fact that the immediate threat capable of completely collapsing Kyiv's entire defense by the end of this year isn't necessarily some massive new Russian offensive. No, it's this exact $18 billion gap. Without it, the military literally cannot sustain its current operations.
Now you might be wondering, why can't they just find that money internally? Well, because the mechanics of this financial cliff are completely suffocating. First off, key Western aid packages are expiring. On top of that, their national debt is rapidly approaching 100% of their GDP. That means rising interest payments are just gobbling up the capital they desperately need for absolute survival. And domestic borrowing? It's doubled since the invasion began. They have essentially squeezed every single drop out of their wartime economy. There's really nothing left to give.
Section 3. The Peace Deal Trap.
So when you see those incredibly bleak financial numbers, the obvious solution seems to be, well, let's just have peace talks. Let's freeze the conflict, right? But hold on, because analysts at the Carnegie Endowment are warning that rushing to the negotiating table might actually be a meticulously designed trap. Let's break down the anatomy of how this works. Step 1 starts off looking great, seemingly productive talks and a temporary ceasefire. But then Step 2 kicks in, which forces a drastic reduction in Ukraine's military capabilities as a strict condition for that peace. The analysis suggests this leads straight into Step 3, what they call a simulation of a settlement. So it looks like peace on paper, but in reality, it's just a strategic pause. It allows forces to regroup, rebuild, and ultimately sets the stage for Step 4, which is restarting an escalated war down the line.
To understand why analysts believe this is the playbook, we need to neutrally look at what the Kremlin's stated political demands actually are. Moscow's goal extends way beyond just holding on to territory like the annexed Donbas. Their stated demands include a strict ban on any Western military infrastructure inside Ukraine, the official legitimization of pro-Russian political forces, and a total permanent block on NATO integration. The underlying strategy here is to ensure Ukraine stays entirely within Russia's sphere of influence, rendering it permanently friendly to Moscow.
So how are Western allies trying to counter this? Well, the US and Europe are attempting to build their own leverage with a 20-point peace plan.
This includes proposals for an internationally overseen demilitarized zone. But the real heavy-hitting counter-leverage? That comes down to hardware, specifically the looming threat of supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. We're talking about weapons with a massive 2,000-kilometer range. They are capable of striking deep into Russian infrastructure, which provides a really powerful deterrent to try and force some genuine, good-faith negotiations.
Section 4. Europe's multi-billion-dollar dilemma.
Right now, the West is essentially playing a high-stakes game of chicken with that $18 billion funding gap we talked about. And guys, this is a true what moment. On the left side of this equation is the cost of backing Ukraine right now, just closing that $18 billion gap. But look at the right side. That's the projected cost if Ukraine's defense collapses and Europe suddenly has to defend its own borders directly against a Russian threat. European think tanks estimate the EU would have to rapidly scramble to form 50 new brigades and muster up 300,000 new troops.
And the cost for Europe to pull that off? An extra 250 billion euros annually. Let that wash over you. That's every single year, just to deter a potential attack. Suddenly, investing $18 billion to support Ukraine's defense doesn't just look like a standard foreign aid package. It looks like, quite literally, the most cost-effective security bargain in modern European history.
And we already know this European dilemma isn't just some theoretical spreadsheet projection. It's a physical reality happening right now. Look at the recent escalations. We've seen drone incursions pushing into NATO airspace over Poland and Estonia. We've seen an Oceanic intermediate-range missile strike hit Ukraine just 70 kilometers from the Polish border. We're talking about nuclear-capable MIRV technologies here. Europe is being forced to adopt these steel porcupine defensive strategies today, right now, as this conflict pushes dangerously close to their front door.
Section 5. 3 scenarios for the end. So given the military deadlock, this crazy funding crisis, and the broader geopolitical chess match, experts are pointing to 3 distinct and, frankly, chilling final scenarios for 2026 and beyond. Scenario 1 is known as the Finnish scenario, which heavily references the 1939 Winter War. In this outcome, Ukraine has to make the absolutely agonizing choice to permanently cede occupied lands, like the Donetsk region, to Russia. But in exchange, the rest of Ukraine survives as a fully independent, sovereign, and heavily fortified Western-aligned state. It's a bitter pill to swallow, basically trading land for survival.
Then there's Scenario 2, the Georgian scenario, echoing the 2008 conflict. Here, Ukraine adamantly refuses to ever formally recognize those lost territories. The result? A fractured, paralyzed nation. Russia maintains control of these unrecognized breakaway regions and uses them to perpetually destabilize Ukrainian politics. It effectively blocks any meaningful integration into the European Union or NATO.
And finally, we have the third scenario, the interim scenario. Honestly, this is just a grinding, prolonged state of limbo. There's no grand peace treaty, there's no real resolution, just frozen front lines with frequent, violent violations. It's a scenario that slowly bleeds both the Russian and Ukrainian economies entirely dry, but it pushes Ukraine much, much faster toward a devastating demographic and economic collapse.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly profound reality. The decisions being made right now for 2026, they aren't just about drawing new lines on a map. They are quite literally about defining the future of global security. Because if a forced bad peace today merely acts as a simulation, a pause that leads to a much bigger continental war tomorrow, is the West truly ready to pay the ultimate price? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.